Welcome to Native Exiles, Alderwood Community Church's podcast, where we talk about following Jesus in the tension of being in the world, but not of it. And we are talking about one of the more recent things to come into our world, which is the huge conversation around AI, machine learning, ChatGPT. And you're in for a treat today because you're going to get two different conversations in this episode, two halves. In the first, I'm going to be talking with Jason Carter, who works at Microsoft and has had a lot of engagement with AI as a professional. He's also the chairman of our elder board at Alderwood Community Church. And so we're going to have a little primer on artificial intelligence. And then Steve and I are also going to respond after that and talk about some of the spiritual implications of AI, what it means for us as we seek to grow spiritually. Can an AI intelligence ever be our pastor? Those kind of questions. And I think you're going to be intrigued. You're going to learn some new things. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Let's jump in. Jason, thanks for being back. It's great to have you.
Thanks. Haven't been on Native Exiles in a while.
Yeah, well, we got a topic that's especially good for you and your background. And for those who don't know, you work at Microsoft. You run Microsoft now. Is that basically right?
That is definitely false. Yeah, absolutely false. But I do work at Microsoft, yeah.
And more than just working at Microsoft, which many thousands of people do, you actually have some interaction with AI in your professional world. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, many people are involved more so than I am, but generally kind of what's happened in the past year, particularly since November of 2022, is there's been an explosion in the industry, and this new type of computing or computer interaction has hit a lot of different product groups, and mine is definitely included in that.
So let's start there. Let's help people understand. There's been this explosion. I think most people, even outside the tech sector, have felt that ChatGPT is being talked about constantly in the news. AI is flying around everywhere.
For sure.
And for some people, this is like this doomsday thing of the world is ending. For some people, it's super exciting. We'll get into that later. But for those who have just a very surface level relationship with AI, we've heard it talked about. We have heard of ChatGPT. Apparently, it can do our homework for us now. Whatever. Help us understand, what is AI? When we're talking about the AI revolution coming, what are we talking about?
Yeah, this is a really, really good topic to dive into because it's actually pretty dense. What we'll do is we'll talk about it in three kind of categories. What most people kind of don't realize is that AI is an evolution of something called machine learning. Mm-hmm. Okay, so machine learning has actually been around for 2 decades in some capacity, which is more or less the idea of giving a computer a set of data so that it can recognize patterns in that data. So the Alexa smart home device that everybody has, or Hey Siri or Hey Google or whatever it is, those have been around for a long time. Those are machine learning. They're trained. They're very limited in their scope of what they can do, but those are learning from large data sets. Okay. What happened this year is we entered kind of a new phase where the capabilities of what we can train a computer to recognize, or the patterns we can teach it to recognize, kind of exploded tenfold in capability. And this is what we let's say cultural society has deemed as artificial intelligence. We'll talk about the third one in a second, but a quick history lesson of what happened is there's mainly 2 big categories that happened in the year 2022. The first is called image generation or image diffusion, which essentially is take every image imaginable, whether it was an illustration, a cartoon, a photo you took on your phone, anything that is available on the internet, give it to a computer that has huge amounts of computational bandwidth, and have it be able to recognize patterns. Now, the only way it can recognize patterns is if there are labels associated with that image. So if I have a picture of a purple gorilla, handing that image to a machine is going to be useless. But if it's labeled as purple gorilla and illustration, now there's patterns that can be recognized. So now I can look at what are commonalities of every picture that's marked illustration or gorilla or purple. And so by giving all of these images to an artificial intelligence or a image generation model, it can start to recognize patterns. And then what you can do is you can create an interface where humans can type in certain things, and it will create an image based on what you've typed.
And that's where the magic is, because when you say AI can recognize patterns, I'm like, boring. Like, big deal. I can recognize patterns. But to understand that simple thing of being able to recognize patterns pretty quickly becomes like you telling some AI, draw me a purple gorilla, and it does it. And it doesn't go find a purple gorilla and give it to you.
It's a brand new image.
It creates something.
And it actually will create an infinite amount of variations of it. So it cannot possibly create the same thing twice, because what it's doing is using patterns to then produce pixels in this case. So I know this is getting a little bit...
Well, let's just hang on to that for a second, because I think part of the amazing, for good or bad, thing about AI is that it seems like computers are for the first time doing things that previously we thought only humans could do. Like even just that thing that you just said about it can't create the same thing twice. That sounds like a very human thing. Like if I gave you pen and paper and said, draw this, and you did it multiple times, no two would ever be exactly the same. Like exactly the same only happens for computers historically.
Right.
But now computers are doing this creative process, it seems like, that seems very close to what humans do.
So you said a really interesting thing. Now we're getting into some philosophy, so this may get a little bit deep, but you said creative process. There are some people, I want to recognize my own bias in this world, which is, I work in this space. I view artificial intelligence, at least where it is today, as a tool that has a lot of potential benefits from humanity, but we need to approach it very cautiously. A lot of people will use the term artificial intelligence because of what you said, that it feels like a computer can now do what a human can do. Humans can take in billions of pieces of data through our senses and formulate and figure out patterns. You do this through behavioral, nourishment as you're growing up, nurturing. You can do this through learning the skill of basketball by doing the same thing over and over and over again and training your muscles, what is effective, and your brain. We learn patterns. So that piece...
I mean, it's like the basics of how we parent, really. Yeah. I mean, hopefully you're consistent with boundaries, you're consistent with what's okay, what's not, and you do it enough times, and your kids finally learn. Like, this is what it means to not be a little monster of a human being any longer.
That's absolutely right. So that piece, there's some commonality to, right? That we take in data, look for patterns, whether we realize we're doing it or not, and then formulate a decision that we're going to make. However, what you said was creative decisions. And this is something where actually I think is good to talk about the third part of AI, which is what's called AGI, or artificial general intelligence.
Okay.
And this is, the Terminator movies. This is this is machines are going to come into my home and as robots and,
Right. And every movie that focuses this, it never ends well. It's not like there's no good example of the AGIs like creating a flourishing world for humans to live in. I mean, it'd be a boring movie, but
that's right.
Yeah.
So what artificial general intelligence is it's basically a point in which computational pattern recognition can reach a point that can do what humans can actually do.
And what you're saying is we're not there yet.
Not only are we not there yet, we are... some people would predict decades away. I might say 15 years away, if at all. There is a real possibility that a computer can never do what a human being can do.
Okay.
There are uniquenesses in that, and creative decision-making and imagination. And imagination, a lot of people would argue, is not a series of patterns. It's something that's unique to humans that a computer cannot do.
Okay, so if I use ChatGPT or I use some of the image generating AIs that are out there, and it feels to me like a human thing is happening, what you're saying is it might feel that way, but it actually is not true.
Well, I think it totally can feel that way. Absolutely. It can feel like magic in some ways. So you look at an artist who paints something beautiful and then you see a computer do it and you're like, that's crazy.
Well, I mean, I've used it even in my own life. Like, I want to get the record clear here. I'm not letting AI write my sermons for me just yet, but I have used it for certain illustrations, certain stories. Sure. So like, the one that's in my mind right now, I used a story of the Christmas truce from World War I, and I had done a little bit of research, but then after reading some articles, I just went to ChatGPT and I said, tell me the story of the Christmas truce in World War I from the perspective of a British soldier, and ChatGPT in 30 seconds wrote out a fairly articulate, compelling story from this thing that I didn't read in my sermon, but it was helpful for me to think through the storytelling aspect of it.
You described a tool that you used to help you get to the illustration you wanted to say on stage for the sermon. Yeah, you're actually just to finish up real quick on AGI. So artificial general intelligence is a theoretical point where computational pattern recognition can perfectly match what a human can do.
Okay.
So it can a computer could reason in the same exact way that a human could reason. I can say from my personal perspective, what exists out there today, though it may seem scary, is nowhere near that. I have suspicions that we may never actually ever get to that point, but if we are, it'll be
So what are some
years
of
away.
the key shortcomings of why we're not there? I mean, one in my mind is ChatGPT, for instance, can confidently give you the answer to the question that you ask, but it seems like really all it's doing is just pulling from the vastness of the internet.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong.
Correct.
And it's not even really making any kind of evaluation of whether it's right or wrong. It's
Yes.
just like, these are things that are out there. Here you go.
Yeah, so you just hit the nail on the head exactly, which is human beings have the ability to self-regulate and say, was that a smart choice that I made? Was that the right decision that I made? Did I give that person the right answer?
How confident am I that I really know the answer to this question? Yeah.
Yeah. A tool that I use often at work is somebody will ask me a question. I'll be like, yeah, let me give you my answer. It's a 10% confidence answer.
Right.
Here you go.
Well, and ChatGPT will never do that
Correct.
yet, right? It's never,
Correct.
you never ask it a question and it goes, I don't know.
Yeah. So just as a brief example, in my world, I work in software development. I have a particular piece of software, and people have used ChatGPT to learn how to develop in this software. And it has what we've considered to be about a 90% accuracy rate, where if you ask it how to create something using our software, it will give you the code to do it. And if you plug that code into our software tool and run it, it will fail. And the reason it will fail is because of it's using pattern recognition. I'll give you a quick example. I work in computer graphics technology. And so we have a simple piece of software, a line of code that says create sphere, create cube, create cylinder. I used ChatGPT to use our software to create a pirate ship. I tried. Mm-hmm. And it gave me the code. And one of the pieces of code was create cone. Create cone does not exist in my software, but it looked at a series of patterns and goes, well, I've got all these other basic shapes.
It can make a sphere.
This one must exist
right.
as well.
Yeah.
And so that is a unique shortcoming of,
Yeah.
and it, by the way, presented that information so that I, as the user, thought I have complete confidence that this is
right.
Accurate.
You're like, I didn't know create code was a thing.
Yeah,
apparently, yeah.
In my own software that I wrote. Yeah, exactly. One last quick thing for a history perspective is, we talked about image generation. That happened early in 2022. And then in November of 2022, what happened was the first iteration of ChatGPT, which was really not the first large language model, but the first that presented an interface that really kind of made it feel like a computer was creating poetry. And writing stories from
feels
different
like you can have a
perspectives.
conversation with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That happened in November, and ever since it had. So I'm going to get the numbers kind of wrong, but if you look at like Facebook, Twitter, Netflix, all of these, there's a certain calculation of how fast does it take to get to 1 million users, and I believe Netflix streaming is one of the fastest before ChatGPT, and it was something like 3.5 months after they released streaming to get to 1 million users. ChatGPT hit 1 million users in 7 days.
Yeah. And I remember that week, like the craziness of everyone talking about this new thing that was happening.
It's
and
insane. Yeah. And it's snowballed ever since, right?
So let's go from that to some of the craziness that is out there. Like what this means for society, what this means for us today, the fact that these new AI interfaces are in the world. It's a thing that's happening. We're never putting this back into Pandora's box again.
Yeah, the toothpaste can't go back into the bottle. Yeah.
And so let's talk about that. Like, let's start with the positive first of all. Like, what's the best case scenario of what AI might be able to do for human society and human flourishing? What's some of the good that might come out of this?
Yeah, there are two stories that I think are really worth sharing just as examples in this. One of them is a story that is not local. It happened nationally. But the story is that there was a single mother of 3 who was working a full-time job. And somebody asked her, what's the worst part or the hardest part of being a single mom with 3 kids? And she said that her greatest desire is that her kids don't eat takeout, but they have a home-cooked meal. And she did not have the mental bandwidth to meal prep, to cook, to creative juice. She was so worn out by dinner time that she just didn't have the ability to do that. And she said it was one of the hardest things. So they ate out a lot, and she felt like she was a failure. And so ChatGPT comes along, and I believe this was in about January, so a couple months after it had been out. And this woman goes to ChatGPT and basically kind of explains the situation. I have 3 kids. They have these kind of dietary preferences, and I don't have time. Can you help me meal prep? And so the really compelling part, and the reason this I think has grown into like the public zeitgeist, for lack of a better word, is that it asks a series of questions to this woman to get more data to better answer or come to the end result. And so it asks, well, great, tell me about, a little bit about what your kids like to eat. Tell me about how much variety you want in your meal planning. Tell me about how close you live to a grocery store, how often you want to go. And it just kind of asks these questions. And then what happens is it does a meal plan for her week. But it doesn't stop there. And this is where I think magic happened for this woman, according to the story she tells, is it plans a meal for every day, but it gives her one consolidated shopping list for the entire week. So she only has to go to the grocery store once. And then when it's Monday, she can go back to the conversation just as though it's a text message thread with a friend. And she can say, what is tonight's meal? And it will say, well, it's Monday. And so this is what we've planned for Monday. Here's the recipe, and let me walk you through how to make it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So all of that stress for this woman went away, and she has used it consistently since. So that's one example. A second example is actually local to home here at Alderwood Community Church, which is we have a person who had a dear friend who passed away. And the wife of that friend asked this Alderwood person to help write the obituary for his friend. And he tried on Monday to sit down and write this obituary, and he just was emotionally overcome with kind of the grief of this loss, and he just couldn't emotionally do it. And then he tried Tuesday, and he tried Wednesday and Thursday, and every time he came to it, he said, how do I describe my friend's life in a few words that does it justice? And so Friday morning, he opens up ChatGPT, and he asks, can you help me write an obituary for a dear friend? And again, part of the magic of what I think has made this feel maybe scary is it appeared to mimic empathy, or at least recognize that I should use words of sadness and grief in my interaction with this human. And so this person basically used ChatGPT. ChatGPT asked a series of questions. Tell me about this person's accomplishments. Tell me about what were they known for. Tell me about their family and dear friends. And he just entered a bunch of information about it. And then what came out was, in his words, the perfect obituary. And he gave it to the widow of his friend, and she loved it, and it printed in the paper the next day. And that happened here at home at Alderwood Community Church. Yeah,
I love that example. I mean, what you're describing kind of holistically is, I think that ChatGPT, in the best case, can enable us to do things that either we couldn't do previously because of the time investment that it would take. I mean, so like the example of the single mom, without ChatGPT, that research, that planning would have taken many hours more than what she had to give. And that's cool. And you can see that happening in all kinds of things. And in certain projects we're doing for work, in learning a hobby, and figuring out how to raise chickens and get eggs, or whatever. Like anything you want to know how to do, ChatGPT can lower the bar of the investment it takes to get up to speed on something. Yeah. And maybe it's not even about time. Maybe it's that ChatGPT can actually enable us to do things that we just couldn't do otherwise. In the case of the obituary, of I'm not in a spot where I have the presence of mind, or maybe even just the writing skills to be able to do something well. And so you can tell it to do something that you want to have done, but that you can't do yourself, and it does it for you.
Yeah. And there's one other kind of area of interest where an AI model has a unique advantage, in my point, over a human, and that's in maybe being a personal tutor. So I think most everybody, if you're learning something new, feels a sense of imposter syndrome, right? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm out of my depth. And through that, we end up with sometimes emotional choices that don't help us achieve our learning.
Like we don't ask questions because we don't want anyone to know that we don't know the
answer.
Or,
hey, I feel too stupid, and I don't want this. I'm embarrass myself if when there's another human, like if I were to ask you how to teach me to do something, I might be really self-conscious about it.
Right, and I might laugh at you.
Correct.
Yeah.
Guaranteed you would. No. And then, but if I'm asking a computer, it's almost like I know this is not a human, and so there's no level of embarrassment for me to go ask something.
There's no emotion involved.
And then if it's giving me a piece of data, and I'm like, but I don't even know what that means, I can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper with no embarrassment whatsoever. And so people are actually using this as a personal tutor to really learn some incredible things without that, maybe perhaps unnecessary, but that very natural sense of embarrassment they might feel with asking another
that's
person.
good. Okay, so let's get to the not so happy test case of this. Like, there's a lot of fear about what AI might do to society, to all of us. Some of it's a long time down the road. Some of it's right now. I mean, from your seat, what do you see as some of the real dangers of AI right now?
I'll say this. I think AI is a new tool. It is a powerful tool that allows you to do some pretty interesting, capable things. Think of it as a woodworking tool, a power tool. Any person who has used a power tool will tell you, you approach that thing with caution, with respect, with recognition that if used wrong, this could be very dangerous. I would not hand a circular saw to my 7-year-old.
Correct.
That's just not going to happen, right? And so I think looking at it from the lens of being a tool, we need to recognize that it has the potential to potentially produce some scary things or have some scary outcomes. One of the things that I have heard is probably the greatest, most simple way to approach thinking about AI is job loss. That's something that a lot of people are really scared about, is job loss. If I can type in, give me a picture of a purple gorilla, and it can provide a very wonderful looking picture of a purple gorilla, what happens to all of the artists out there who
Your
make pictures
purple
of
gorilla drawing side hustle is in trouble,
right,
Jason.
Exactly. Yeah, that is absolutely right. And if your thought process is, well, I am a pen and paper artist, and this is the limitation of what I will do, the general statement that people have said is, AI is not going to replace your job as an artist. An artist using AI is going to replace your job as an artist. Yeah,
I mean, AI is not at this point to the place where people are going to be able to fire their whole workforce and just like use ChatGPT to replace it.
Not at all. That actually happened recently with this last week with an eating disorder helpline. They dismissed their entire human staff, thinking we can just use basically a large language model, not ChatGPT, but something similar, and it will answer phone calls and you can talk to it. And it gave catastrophically terrible responses. So no, we're not anywhere close to it being able to.
But we can imagine a world where we would be. But even then, you're saying it's more likely that people who know how to use these tools are going to become far more effective in what they do than people who don't.
Absolutely.
And so if you are in these professions and you refuse to embrace ChatGPT, your job might be in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you back to another analogy is when computer graphics, 3D animation kind of took over from hand-drawn 2D animation. There was a moment at Disney where it was like, hey, I am a 2D animator. My feet are in the sand. I'm not moving from that standpoint. And a lot of those people aren't animating anymore. Whereas people who said, I'm going to embrace this computer and 3D animation, they're still animators.
I think what's so scary to people in this conversation is that job loss is a thing that's been around forever. I mean, the Industrial Revolution, any advancement in technology typically brings with it some sort of job loss. There's not a lot of typists in the world anymore. There's not a lot of,
arithmetists at NASA.
Phone operators, like there's always job loss. I think what's so unique about ChatGPT and other AI models is it seems like for the first time, it's white collar jobs that are at risk. It's not blue collar. We haven't figured out a more efficient way to do labor. We figured out a more efficient way to write or to create art of some kind. And so job loss fear is entering new sectors of our economy that previously haven't ever had to think through that. And I think that's a lot of the fear of it. I think in my mind, I love the way of thinking of it, that it's a tool. I think the big question is it a tool like a table saw, like where you can make some beautiful things, it might cut your hand off, or is it a tool like nuclear fission, where maybe you can power the entire country and that's amazing, or you can also destroy all of humanity. Like what level of tool are we talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'm certainly of the mindset where I would definitely tell people I work near this space. It's involved in my work. It is, I don't believe, something that we need to be panicking over. I absolutely think it's something we should have caution over as any technology advances, especially as rapidly as the last year and a half have gone. Approach things cautiously. But the worry that's out there about the idea of like, okay, are we going to suddenly hand all the nuclear codes over to a computer to make decisions on our behalf that it should be making? Like, no, like we
probably shouldn't do that.
We're not anywhere close to that point. Now, in society, there's a lot of conversations about should this advancement be regulated? Should it be regulated by individuals, by corporations, by government? That is an active conversation that's happening. And the best thing that I would encourage somebody to do who's maybe worried about this space is recognize that with anything, there's potential good and there's potential caution, and just do research. Don't just take what you hear on the radio as the fact. Don't even just necessarily take my singular opinion as fact. Like, if you care, do some research, understand what's being done out there, and then, maybe if you're really concerned about it, voice your opinions to those who are in a position to maybe do something about it.
And maybe ask ChatGPT what the right answer is to the fears and
I think people have done that. I think I've seen a couple of tweets of that one on there.
Well, Dave, this has been awesome, man. Thanks for the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, Steve, good to have you join. Love to debrief a little bit of this conversation with Jason with you. What stuck out to you as you were listening to it?
The most, I think, prominent thing he said that really got me thinking was there's a question of whether this can ever actually achieve what we're afraid of, that it can actually do what only a human can do. He's not even sure. He's in the middle of the industry, and he's not sure. I think that's the question that's sort of looming over everything is it just 15 years away, or is it an impossible fool's errand?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Did you buy his assessment of the dangers and the benefits? Are you as optimistic as he is?
Okay, well, I mean, one of the things he overlooked is just the sheer joy that AI can provide. You've probably seen some of these ones, like the classic one I saw where you tell AI to create like some narrative about removing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich from a VCR.
On how to remove a peanut butter and jelly sandwich from a VCR.
In King James English.
Correct. It's beautiful. Go look it up if you haven't seen that one.
Great comedy.
Yeah, there's so much, humor, intrigue, awe, amazement. I just listened to a podcast episode. It was an NPR podcast called Planet Money, and they used AI to completely write and also deliver an entire podcast episode. So they had an AI model generate an artificial voice of one of their hosts, and the AI spoke half the podcast to the co-host, and the entire script was written by AI. And I mean, just even listening to that, it's just amazing to watch what
you mean like it literally emulated the other host's voice, so you couldn't tell.
Yeah, it wasn't perfect. It was like 99%, but it's so amazing compared to what you would expect is possible right now that it blows you away. And so, there's so much fun that's coming from that and some utility. The dangers, though, I think it's one of the things is like you just don't know what you don't know.
Right.
We don't know all the impacts that it's going to have. And you can imagine it being significant. Jason mentioned like, if you're an artist, AI is not going to take your job, but an artist with AI might take your job.
Right.
I think it's also possible that one artist with AI will take 10 artists' jobs. And so you think about that and, what industries are going to look like in 20 years, we really have no idea.
Right.
If you would have gone back to the 1940s or 50s and explained to people that the entire industry of telephone operators was going to completely disappear, like you wouldn't have believed it. You wouldn't have been able to imagine it. And that's happened throughout history thousands of times. And so
For sure. And I just think like the question of how does this thing end up is so huge. We have so many examples of technologies that have gone both good and bad, and the law of unforeseen consequences is always there. I think like maybe you've heard this one, but in the 60s, when we just started sort of becoming more conscious of the environmental crises that we face, one of the things that happened was home computers just started looming as a possibility. And they said one of the huge benefits for home and business computers is it will virtually erase the need for paper.
Right. Email will take place of letter writing. We will save all the trees.
And here we are 50, 60 years later, and that's not exactly what
Nothing has
happened.
generated more paper use than home computers. I mean, yeah, and ink cartridges that live in landfills forever, and all of that stuff.
So we can't predict. I think that's the point.
And I feel like for human beings, when you think about kind of an unknown like this, like many of us are either way too pessimistic or way too optimistic.
Yeah.
And one of the optimistic cases that I just don't buy right now is kind of the idea that AI is going to replace so much of human productivity. It's going to replace so much of the need for people to work that we're going to live in this kind of utopian existence where we only have to work 5 hours a week and we all have enough to enjoy and eat, and we just get to do what we want with our time.
What will we do with our time?
Well, the thing is, we will work. Like, if anything has proven that to be true, like, you look at the history of work and productivity, we are so much more productive than we were 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And whenever we gain the productivity of new tools, rather than live on the same amount of wealth with less time invested, we just increase our standard of living and spend the same amount of time working that we always spent. And so, the fact that we now have dishwashers and laundry machines and lawn mowers and like just on and on and on, we never actually take time back. We always just strive for the next level of having more stuff.
Yeah, it's like getting a pay raise at work. You think that's going to solve all your financial problems, but soon enough, you're just spinning as much as you were before.
But I want to get into some of the more spiritual aspect of this with you. And I think there's something unique about what we're seeing with AI right now, which is that, as we said earlier with Jason, it's able to do things that, whether it's true or not, feel like only humans could do previously, maybe only that humans should be able to do. And while that has impacts in the labor force, it also has aspects for us spiritually. And I'm thinking of the way that right now we're seeing AI creep into areas of human relationship, where historically there's things that we've needed real human community for. We've needed people in our life. And now there are starting to be some things where AI is getting into that space. So just for a couple of examples for folks, one of my favorites actually is this little AI app you can download on your phone right now if you want to. It's called Woebot, Woebot. And what Woebot is it's an AI that has been trained to know cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very common way of doing counseling and therapy. And so it can ask you all kinds of questions about things that are going on in your life, what's stressing you out, what you're anxious about, why you're depressed, anything like that. And it knows the cognitive behavioral way to respond to that, much like a human counselor, a human therapist would do. And so for, free, you can get counseling from this Woebot AI app that you would have to pay $180 an hour for if you had a human there. And so, how do we think about that kind of thing? It's not just counseling, it's also just friendships. Like, there's an app called Replica that has been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times, and it essentially is just an AI friend. It's a replica. It's like, an avatar, and you text with it just like you would text a human being, and it'll ask you how your day is going and ask you what you're thinking about and keep you company. And people are using this to fill a need that previously you would need an actual human friend to fill.
You turned me on to this one. I did some research on it, and it's kind of crazy because it sort of pursues relationship with you. I mean, I get annoyed when I get notifications on my phone throughout the day from certain things, but this thing just notifies you throughout the day, just not to tell you anything.
Like it's sending you a text.
Yeah, hey,
just
how
like
you doing?
A text from a friend, same thing. Replica will just text you saying,
what's on your mind?
Yeah.
How's that thing going that you told me about yesterday? The crazy thing about it is apparently as you keep progressing in, if you want to use in quotes, relationship with this replica, suddenly it stops responding to you behind a paywall. If you want the next, and that's the crazy
thing. It'll text
thing.
you and say like, hey, how was practice yesterday? Or how did, that big meeting go? And you respond and say, thanks for asking. It went pretty well. And then it gives you like a blurred out response and says, if you want to know what I think, you're going to have to pay $19.99 a month.
Which is just such a bald-faced picture of how evil this thing could become.
So, and that's like that's one thing to remember when we're talking about AI is it is business. Like people are trying to figure out how to make money off of this. And so, we just have to be aware of the fact that this is a financial thing as much as it is,
Yeah, Replica is not just programmed to like love and get to know you. It's programmed to love and get to know you so it can make money.
Right. And so maybe there's one difference of how AI is not going to be able to replace real human interactions, because I know if any of my friends treated me that way, it would probably be the end of our friendship. If I texted you next week and said, hey, can you pray for me because something's going on? He said, well,
It'll cost you.
Give me $10 and I will pray for you. That's a different kind of thing. But I mean, one of the questions in my mind is like, is it possible? When we think about being created in the image of God, being created for community, God eternally in community, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He creates us in his image to be in a relationship with one another, to be in a relationship with him. There are things about how we're wired where we need people. We are social. We need interaction. We need people to speak with, to share our lives with, to give advice, to listen to us. It's this deep human need. It's a part of how we're made. And now that there are AI apps or sites that can replicate some aspects of that human connection, do we think it's possible for it ever to really replace the needs that God created in us for human interaction, or is it not on the table at all?
Well, one of the things that we do as humans is we look for patterns. Not only does AI look for patterns, and I think about the pattern we already discussed. There's always unforeseen consequences with new technologies. I think there's also unforeseen needs within us as human beings. And I think that's part of what plays into this whole discussion. I mean, we just lived through COVID, right? And one of the things that COVID, I think, revealed so strongly to us was, oh, wow, well, we're home. We can just, watch a church service on the internet. But we really found we were hungry, almost inexplicably, just to be in the presence of another human being. And I think there's things about us, the way God made us, what it means to be made in the image of God, that very arguably AI will never be able to scratch.
But what if, the new Apple artificial reality, goggles come out, and so it's not just, you're typing something in or you're watching it online, but what if it for all intents and purposes, it looks like you are around human beings. There's someone sitting on the couch in your living room with you, and you're having a conversation, and they're asking you how you're feeling, and like it's able to replicate all the things that we sense of human interaction. Like, what about then? Could it replace human interaction then?
Well, shoot, let's take it one step further. I mean, let's go really sci-fi movie on this. Let's say it's just an actual robot that is cloaked in, flesh and blood, for lack of a better term, that looks so convincingly real, but it's programmed with a computer chip. If I'm sitting there, so I think one of the questions that you and I have talked about a little bit is, can AI pastor a person?
Yeah.
You and I are pastors.
Are we going to be some of the job losses?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And I just play back some things. Like just this last week, I met with a lady in our congregation who just wanted to sit and talk with me. And we're friends. So one of the ways the conversation started was I mentioned her late mom, who was one of the sweetest, godliest ladies I've ever met. And I actually visited her mom in the hospital. And I shared a funny story about her mom had a stroke and she couldn't talk. And she was trying to get my attention about something that was in her hospital room. And she was pointing, and I couldn't guess what she wanted. And she just laughed about it. It was funny to her. And I told her how amazing, how godly her mom must have been to be a person who was so frustrating to sit there not being able to talk, but she could laugh as this moron, pastor couldn't figure it out. And that was this instant connection between us because we had this shared, not only like person we cared about, but like emotional response. Yeah. Can an AI like robot can only mimic that? It can't feel that.
Yeah.
There's something about humanness that just transcends what a robot can do.
I think that's huge. My answer also is no. I think there's something that we need in human community that robots or AI or whatever can't replace. But I do want to acknowledge before we get there, I think it can replace some of it.
For sure.
There is some positive stuff even, I think, that can come from engaging with AI like we would engage with a human. Like sometimes some aspect of why we need to speak with each other is that there's something about just putting your thoughts into words. There's something about just reflecting on what's going on in your life that just by speaking it to someone, you are processing it, you're thinking through it, you're maybe allowing yourself to dwell in some of the emotion of it that you've been putting aside. And so I could see that there might be some benefit from using an app like Wobot as your cognitive behavioral therapist, or having a conversation with an AI that's just helping you process, put thoughts on paper, any of that kind of stuff. But there is something missing there. And like, I think as I've reflected on what it is that no matter how good the technology gets could never be replaced, there is this aspect of mutual sacrifice that is at the heart of all true human interaction and even relationship with God, where part of what a relationship is, what a community is it is a group of people or pair of people who have decided, I am going to set aside some of my own desires, my own needs, my own wants, and I'm going to do that for the good of someone else, for the good of the community. I'm going to give of myself to this person, and in return, they're going to do that. And because of this mutual sacrifice that we're giving, we're going to develop a real bond. And so obviously Jesus is the prime example of this, that even though he did not need anything from us, he did not deserve to suffer with us because of our sin, he self-sacrificially gave of himself, took the form of a man, went to the cross in our place. Like, that's our relationship with God is formed on self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
But it's true of every human relationship as well. So like marriage is an easy one to think of, that you can't build a life with someone without being willing to set aside some of your own desires and needs and wants and to give the other person what they need rather than what you want. And it can be as simple as where you go out to dinner on a Friday night, or it could be as huge as, trying to figure out how many kids are we going to have, and I want this many and you want that many, or where are we going to live because my job is going to be in Phoenix and you want to be here in Seattle. And like these massive things, if our lives are going to come together in a real relationship, we're going to have to figure out how to self-sacrificially live for one another and not for ourselves. So marriage is big, but it's also just any relationship. I mean,
for sure.
Any friendship is this way. Even if you're just going to try to get coffee with someone, you have to bring your own calendars and your own, priorities, and you have to mesh them together in a way where we say we're both going to be at the same place at the same time, even though I would prefer to be at Starbucks and you would prefer to be at Woods and I would prefer Tuesday afternoon, but you're busy, So
yeah.
Any relationship requires self-sacrifice. And that is something that I don't think AI can ever actually participate in.
It can't, because it's ultimately programmed to want one thing. It's instructed by somebody to deliver this one thing, and that's its whole strategy. Wyatt, let me counsel you
Please.
on this. That's supposed to be tongue-in-cheek, because we decided that counselors aren't needed. I'm pursuing a counseling degree, and here I'm being told that's going to be unnecessary. I mean, I'm listening to Jason a minute ago, and he's talking about how great it is to go to a tutor, which might be an AI function, because my feelings of embarrassment or shame can get set aside because I'm not talking to a human being. Well, that's awesome. Like, that's part of the pro that we're talking about. The con is that it's not going to sympathize or empathize with the fact that I'm embarrassed or help me with my embarrassment. It's only going to write the thing I need it to write, but it doesn't. So when you talk about self-sacrifice, part of it is, like, this AI program might perfectly do what I want it to do, but at some level, that's not what I want. You might decide to sacrifice something for me, Wyatt, because we're friends, and you might actually do it wrong. You might sacrifice something that I didn't actually need you to sacrifice. But the fact that you wanted to sacrifice for me is why I'm connected to you.
Right.
Like, AI is always going to do it, quote, perfectly, but it's doing it perfectly because it's programmed. You're doing it out of your own free will. You're actually doing it out of empathy with me. Like Jesus, we're told, is a man familiar with sorrow and acquainted with grief. Like, that AI program knows nothing of sorrow and grief.
Well, and that's where there's something really important for our spiritual growth that comes out of those kinds of relationships, where one of the main ways that God is shaping us and forming us and making us more and more into the image of Christ is through the sacrifice of human relationships. So as you're close to someone, as they disappoint you, as they aren't able to be for you what you want them to be, it's a character forming process of you to learn forgiveness and grace. Like, as somebody requests something of you that you don't want to give because you are busy and you'd rather do something else, like, that's a character forming moment of, I'm going to be like Jesus. I'm going to, give to this person, even though I would rather not see them tonight. I would rather not pick up the phone right now. You're actually being formed by that. And AI relationships are never going to be able to do that because they operate on your time, on your schedule. They never say they're busy. They never refuse to talk to you. They never need to be forgiven. They never need to forgive you. Like, there's no character forming that's happening because it's designed to be one side of a relationship that's just serving you always. It has no needs. It never gets tired. It never has a bad day. Like, it never requires anything of you. It's just there to serve you. And that won't that won't create you into the image of Christ like a real human relationship will.
Therefore, it never sacrifices, but it also never empathizes.
Yeah.
And I think again, I'm thinking to my training as a counselor, I think what people desire more than anything else isn't just the right answers, isn't just even understanding what's wrong with me. It's that connection. I want someone to empathize, to feel what I'm feeling.
And the AI might be trained really well to mimic empathy.
Behind a paywall.
And maybe even a free version,
Maybe.
Who knows? The government puts out just a, pro bono, like, here's a friend for you. It might be able to replicate human empathy really well, but you will know deep down that there is no human being really feeling what you feel on the other side. It won't be able to meet that deep longing to know and to be known. And you shared this example earlier, and I loved it, about this interaction you had with someone who you were remembering being with her mom in a hospital, and you were sharing a moment from that. And you said, the AI robot's never going to be able to have that moment. And I wonder if some people actually push back, like, why not? Like, let's just imagine there's Android Pastor Steve and Android Steve was at the hospital with the mom and was there, and that moment happened, and Android Steve remembers the thing and can share it later. And like, technologically, it might be possible to experience something like that, but the part of the reason why that moment is so meaningful is because of the self-sacrifice involved in human relationship. The fact that you were in that hospital room is meaningful, not just because you were there, but because it means you weren't at home with your kids. It means you weren't getting your sermon done that week. It means you were giving something up to be there, and that's where the meaning is actually found.
It also means that I was able to share with her. Honestly, the thing is, I looked at this woman, it just blew my mind. That's why I can remember it 10 years later, is I personally hate, Wyatt, when I want to do something and I can't do it. And here's this woman who is now physically incapable of speech because she's had a stroke. And instead of like clenching her fist like I do when I can't accomplish something, she's laughing. And I felt that in the core of my soul, even my own shortcoming, which AI is never going to feel shortcoming. That was part of what we connected, not just the memory of her late, beautiful mom, but like we both know what it's like to feel that frustration, and we laughed about it. AI can only be like programmed to mimic that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you asked earlier, like, can AI pastor us? And obviously, we're a little biased in this. So we
No, we're not biased.
But I think, like, one thing I want to say is, if the question is, can AI help us grow spiritually? I would say yes. I mean, part of this gets at just the question of, what does it mean to pastor someone?
Yeah.
If you want to know what's a great Bible study to do that's going to help me with anxiety, I have a couple I could send you, but I bet you ChatGPT actually will have a better answer than me on that. If you want to say, like, hey, plan out a Bible reading program for the month of July, and I'm going to read my Bible 5 times a week, and I want to do it, I want to be in the New Testament, I want to be in the Old Testament, like, write me a bespoke Bible study plan. Like, ChatGPT will do that, and I will tell you, I don't have time. So, there's things that AI can do that our human pastors won't be able to do.
Right.
And I would say, go for it. Like, let's get creative and think about how we can do things that we wouldn't be able to do without these kinds of tools. But is that what it means to pastor? Is what it means to pastor just to deliver theological information, or to, answer theological questions? Or
To take your example one step further, the AI is going to generate the best of the best. I mean, it's going to pull, these speakers that are the most popular speakers off the internet, or writers, and they're not going to put up with like my bumbling attempts at an answer, because I'm not the most, sharp tool out there. But I mean, it goes back to kind of what Jason said. Like, if I'm embarrassed and I go to AI as a tutor, it's a great tutor. It's not a great shepherd.
Well, that's the word.
That's the word, right?
Because that's what it means to pastor.
Exactly.
The shepherd.
And the shepherd knows the sheep, and the shepherd lays down his life for the sheep.
And we all long for that. I mean, Jesus is our great shepherd, but we also all long for people who care for us spiritually. And it just is not the same thing to be receiving spiritual direction from someone or something that does not actually care for you. it might be trained to sound like it cares for you, but it does not actually have any emotional connection, any sense of obligation or duty. It is just lines of code processing how it was, programmed to process. And I do not think that will ever be able to meet the spiritual needs and the spiritual longings that all of us have.
I agree. I mean, I think back to Genesis, in the perfect world of the Garden of Eden, where we're told that God walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. And to me, that has to be some physical embodiment of God. Mm. And when the world broke through sin, that physical, very personal, intimate connection was broken on some level. There was still a tutor. God still instructed. He still spoke. And then we go through years and years of pain. We just read through the Old Testament and God's story. And then again, the incarnation. Yeah. Jesus shows up in a body. And we relate to him in a body, and he comes to shepherd and not just teach. I mean, there's something about that person, that body, that transcends anything I believe AI is ever going to be able to deliver.
Absolutely. Yeah, maybe I'll just leave people with a pastoral encouragement, and it's a human pastoral encouragement, so you take it for what it's worth. But I think that one of the dangers of this moment we're in is that the substitutes for real community, the substitutes for real relationship, are getting much better than they ever have been. Mm-hmm. Like, it is only now possible to even try to replace human interaction with computers. And so it's gonna be more tempting to try to go that path. It's gonna be more tempting to think, I don't have to be a part of an actual church community. I can just watch a service online every week. it's more tempting to think I don't have to actually engage with any kind of human counselor or human therapist because I have Wobot and it's pretty close, Like, the substitutes are getting much better. And it's going to be more tempting to try to find what you're created to find only in real community, real relationship. But don't give in to that, because it won't ultimately satisfy you, and it'll take you longer to figure that out because the substitutes are getting better. But you really were made for community. You were made for connection. You were made for people. You were made to be in a relationship with God. And it is worth it to invest. It is worth it to go through some of the shame and the embarrassment and some of the awkwardness of human interaction and some of the frustration of people not meeting your expectations, like all the negative that's there. It's actually a part of what makes it so important, because it's how God's shaping you. And so pursue it.
God shapes us through the messiness, not only of ourselves, but of this community that we call the body. We are the hands and feet of Christ. He's at work in this body. And yeah, sometimes it's going to be messy. Sometimes it's going to disappoint us. AI is going to always have the perfect answer, which is why sometimes I fear that as we go down that road, we're going to hate human beings. But Jesus loves human beings, and You're right. He uses the messiness of human relationships and human sin even to draw us to himself.
Amen. This has been a fun one, Steve. Thank you.
Great stuff. Hope you really enjoyed that conversation. Actually, disclaimer, the whole thing was AI generated. Wyatt, right?
I'm an AI. You're an AI. We've been AIs the whole time.
That's why we're so good looking. Actually, that was the real thing. Had a blast with that. Hope it was as interesting for you as it was for us. We always appreciate you watching, following us on Native Exiles, and we'll look forward to meeting you again next time on Native Exiles.